I'm going to start with a rant. And it'll be a low-key rant that I hope will make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but will not make you so uncomfortable that you're not able to understand the motivation behind it. It is tiresome for me how many times I do it and how many times you do it. And the it is blame God for so many things in the world that truly come out of our brokenness, our sinfulness. That it is much easier for us to say it was God's will, God's time, than it is for us to say, I am sorry, I messed up, I knew that it was wrong, but I did it anyway. What made me start thinking of this was the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of John, where Nicodemus comes to Jesus and says, how is it possible for someone to be born when they are old? And Jesus speaks the most famous football words in the Bible, which is John 3:16, that God has sent his Son into the world, that the world through the Son might be saved. And in that is the repudiation of our willingness to blame God. I said Sunday in worship that God did not create you and I for punishment. God created us out of a love of possibility and a promise of a peace of holiness that resides in each and every one of us. John Wesley called it prevenient grace, a grace that shows up inside of us that responds to the presence of God before we have any idea of a personal relationship with God. And in the 3rd chapter of John, there is the words that follow John 3:16, not quite as famous, and they are, for God sent his Son into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world through his Son might be saved. What a tremendous difference that is in our sometime understanding. Now, John goes on to be very clear that the closest way and the clearest way and the most profound way to be redeemed is in that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. To know Christ, to accept Christ's redemption offer of the cross is the way of redemption in the Gospel of John. But you go back to that, God sent his Son into the world not to condemn the world. And you recognize that in God's plans for us, there is so much more than we sometimes give God credit for and are willing to look to ourselves for accountability. In one of the Sunday school classes here called Pathways, the Pathways class, which is made up primarily of parents of the children who participate in Sunday school and who come to other places in worship, we're looking at an Adam Hamilton book called Revival. And what it does is it takes the history of the Wesley family, Methodism founder John Wesley, his brother Charles, almost a co-founder of it, and looks at what prepared them to lead a Methodist movement that was literally compelling enough to people to shift the cultural mores of its time in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And last week we were looking at their college years, and I had to start off by admitting that my college years were not primarily known for my spiritual growth, which is a little bit of a shame because what scientists are finding is that with the maturing of our brains, when we are college age, that is 18 to 23, 25, we are most receptive to the formation of spiritual mature themes. But while they were at college, Wesley, his brother Charles, and other people gathered together and they began to make a plan for their lives that they hoped would bring them into a sort of Christian perfection, a relationship with God that was founded on a total unity, a total meshing of them and of God. And as they worked together, They came up with a set of questions that I found very helpful for me as I seek to accept that God holds me accountable, but God is not in the business of creating me for a life of punishment. One of the questions was, every time they got together, was to take the time as a group to ask one another, how is your soul today? And for them, that was a state of mind question, a state of practice. What today has given evidence of the presence of God in your life? And that beginning for decades was the beginning of every Methodist gathering of small groups. What is the state of your soul today? The practice of it has gone away very much so, but it's still very, very relevant. What is the state of our soul? It's almost 10 o'clock. In a few moments, I'll get to go to chapel with the children, and my soul is going to be much lighter, perhaps, than it was at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock this morning. What brings joy? What brings anger? And where is God in the midst of all of it? If God has created us for goodness, then how are we to live our lives and to be present with God, even as we try to grow closer? God sent His Son into the world.